Hey, what's up, folks? This is Tony Brewer. You're listening to or watching, as the case may be, Cogitations. Cogitations is the podcast where we think about things, we contemplate them, we turn them over in our minds, and then we discuss them. Daniel chapter 7, verse 28, Daniel writes, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart." Now, we're not going to keep the matter in our heart. We're going to talk about it. And today we're going to talk about this immigration deal with this fella that's in the news, this Maryland father who was deported. That's the craziest stuff I've ever heard, the way they're framing this. Listen, you know who's trying to get one over on you by who is framing the information. Just disseminate the information. Put that picture out there. Paint that picture with words and let people look at it. Good morning, Mike Osnes. It's good to see you. It's actually good afternoon for me. I'm 2 hours ahead of Central Standard Time. Most of my listeners are in Central Standard Time. I try my best to go live at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. That's noon Atlantic. That's my time. So, yeah, that doesn't always happen. But I'm so thankful for all of the listeners that tune in despite my inconsistency. Whoops. That's no good. All right. So let's get in here. Remember, follow us on Rumble. Go to rumble.com and sign up to Christianity Now. We've taken off a little bit on Rumble. We've got like 52 subscribers. We need 100. So just go to Rumble and subscribe. If you want to support the show, there's ways to do that in the show notes. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to leave the follow us on Rumble thing up. I guess I will do the Join the Christianity Now Facebook group. Join the Christianity Now Facebook group. It's fun. I'm needing moderators. If you're interested in being a moderator for the Christianity Now Facebook group, and there's some perks that you can take advantage of, we would love to have you moderate that for us. If you understand what I mean when I say the church about which Jesus spake, when he said, upon that rock I will build my church. If you understand what I mean when I say, if you're a member of that church, then reach out to me. I want to be. I need some moderators. That's all I'll say. All right. Now I'm going to leave the follow us on Rumble thing up. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put the icon up. Now I won't be able to see your comments whenever this icon is up. So let's get right into the material this morning. Setting the record straight. Let's talk about immigration. Look, there's a lot of noise in the air about immigration law, executive power, and the role of the courts. You've got folks quoting the Constitution sideways. They're throwing around the term due process and assuming every deportation must be some kind of injustice. But what's often missing from the conversation is a basic understanding of how the system actually works and how it's actually intended to work. This episode of Cogitations is not about taking sides in a political fight. It's about getting honest with the facts. That's what we're here for. We want to be understanding of the time. We want to be sons of Issachar. So that's what we cogitate about. The Constitution, we want to be honest with the facts about the Constitution, about the structure of the government. And yes, most importantly, I suppose, about what the Bible has to say about lawful authority. So let's walk through it together and set the record straight. To get our footing, we first need to revisit the basics. This is the structure of the U.S. government. And many people, I don't know if they realize this. I think a lot of man on the street videos prove that most folks don't understand the basic organization of the government. We learned this very early. So the United States government is divided into three distinct branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Congress passes laws. That's the legislative. The president carries them out. That's the executive. And the courts, that's the judicial, interpret and apply those laws in specific cases. It's not a hierarchy, it's a balance. Each branch is distinct in function. Congress doesn't enforce the law. The courts do not write it. and the president does not get to reinterpret it. He's tasked with executing it. That's why it's the executive branch. Now, here's the kicker. Courts don't have any power to enforce what they rule. This may sound surprising, but it's true. Alexander Hamilton wrote in the Federalist 78 that the judiciary has neither force nor will, only judgment. That means courts can interpret the law, but they rely on the executive branch to take action. If the president doesn't act, the courts can't force him. That's not dysfunction. That's how the system was designed. And if you want two left-wing examples of this, you have Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Barack Obama said, hey, we're going to make these dreamers. We're going to make the DACA program. And he did it contrary to the courts. And then Joe Biden did the payment of the student loans, and he opened the border and told the border guards to ignore constitutional law. This is, I mean, it's in the news. It's documented. Now, if Barack Obama and Joe Biden can ignore, quote unquote, ignore, and I don't know that I'm just going to use it the way the left is framing the right now. I'm going to frame the left. If Barack Obama and Joe Biden can ignore Constitution and ignore the courts and all that good stuff to do what they want to do, and in fact, Joe Biden or Barack Obama said he could do a lot of help for the American people if he could get rid of that Constitution. But if they can do that, why can't President Trump do that while he's in power? Now, I don't think that's a good way to run a nation. But at its very base, I mean, if we're down at the bottom, if we're down at the bedrock, then why wouldn't we take that stance? Hey, the left lost. The nation, there's a referendum at the polls, and this is the way it is for at least 4 years. So get out the vote, left, if that's what you want to do. But anyway, I'm getting way too political. I'm just wanting to talk about the facts of this. So the courts can interpret the law, but they rely on the executive branch to take action. And if the president doesn't act, whether it's a left wing or right wing, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or J.D. Vance, a vice president, or it doesn't matter. If the president doesn't act, the courts cannot force him. That's not dysfunction. That's how the system was designed. So let's drill in a little closer. Let's talk about immigration courts and executive authority. Immigration courts are not part of the Article 3 judiciary. They're not independent courts in the same way a federal district court is. They are administrative courts that fall under the Department of Justice, which is part of the executive branch, which is ultimately answering to the President of the United States. In other words, when someone goes before an immigration judge, they're still under the authority of the executive branch, not the judicial. That judge works for the Department of Justice, not the federal judiciary. So when people start throwing around due process, it's worth remembering what that actually means in this very limited and specific context. Yes, non-citizens have some constitutional protections under the Fifth Amendment. In other words, you can't just snatch somebody off the streets and put them in an American jail and hold them without due process. They have to be guilty of committing a crime, and they have to be guilty of committing a crime, found guilty of committing a crime in our courts. Period, bar none. I dealt with this whenever I was training horses. The guy that I trained horses for employed a lot of illegals, and they'd get popped by the cops every once in a while, and you'd have to bail them out. But even so, they went through the process, okay? And incidentally, they were absolutely illegal. They should not have been here. Once they were in the system, they should have been sent back south. Why wasn't that taken? Why wasn't that law followed? If an administration can overlook that law, then another administration can overlook another law. Just think about that for a minute. All right. So due process does not mean indefinite protection from removal. It means a fair procedure as determined by law. And when the law says a non-citizen can be removed, Due process has already been satisfied through that process. And it doesn't have to be personal to one individual. In other words, Trump legally declared people that's part of the MS-13 gang as terrorists, foreign terrorists on domestic soil. He legally did that. The court said that he could do that. And this person that we are talking about today, he was found to be a part of the MS-13 gang. He has to go home. He does not have to have committed a crime. He does not have to have been proven to be anything other than an MS-13 gang member. If it is proven that he's an MS-13 gang member, actually, I would say even if the immigration court accepted it as fact, then that court gets to send him home, gets to send him back to El Salvador where he's a citizen. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. I'm getting ahead of myself. So when the law says a non-citizen can be removed, and the law says that this particular non-citizen can be removed, due process has already been satisfied. So let me offer a real-life example. I live in Canada right now. I was invited by the province of New Brunswick to apply for permanent residence, me and my family. I had a work permit. I've still got a work permit. I had legal status. I still have legal status. But when I left the country and then tried to come back into Canada, I was missing a document. This happened back last year whenever I sold my truck. And you know what the Canadian border agent said? He said, your invitation and your permit doesn't guarantee you reentry. I had to go through an entirely different process, an entirely new process to be able to be allowed back into the country. Even though everything was in place on paper, I was still subject to the discretion of the Canadian government. And specifically, I was subject to the discretion of that particular border agent. If you don't have a right to reentry document, which is a passport or a permanent residence card, they can turn you away at the border if they don't like the cut of your jib. I'm serious. And that's the way it is in any nation in the world. I was still subject to the discretion of the border agent, which was ultimately the discretion of the government. And that's exactly how sovereign nations operate, including the United States. At least that's how the United States was intended to operate. Now let's talk about a name that stirred up a lot of conversation. Kilmar Ábrego García, all right? The Maryland father. Some people are calling his deportation an injustice. They're saying it was a violation of a court order. They're calling it cruel and unnecessary. But when you look at the full story, things come into sharper focus. Ábrego entered the United States as a minor. He didn't immediately apply for asylum. When he eventually did, his request was denied. A stay of deportation was later granted. So keep in mind, his request for asylum was denied when he eventually applied for asylum. But the court, the immigration court, offered a stay of deportation, not as a right, but as a courtesy because of concerns about gang violence in El Salvador. This is on a court document that the judge said that he would, that Ábrego expressed, and the judge believed that if he was sent back to El Salvador at that time, that his life was in danger because of, listen to it, rival gangs. The necessary inference is that the court accepts the fact as true that Ábrego was in a gang, and the gang that would have been rival was MS-13. So times have changed in El Salvador. El Salvador today is not what it was 10 years ago. President Bukele, I think is how you pronounce his name, his administration has radically changed the landscape. MS-13 and other gangs have been aggressively rooted out. The country now ranks among the safest in Central America, maybe the safest in the world. In light of that, the Trump administration made a decision. The discretionary stay no longer applied. Abrego was sent home, and I'm pretty sure I'm butchering his name. Anyway, now critics say that this defied a court order. But the reality is this: unless a court issues a legally binding injunction, and even then enforcement depends on the executive branch, the president retains discretion in immigration enforcement. Was it harsh? Well, that's a fair discussion. Was it illegal? Not according to the structure of our government. And what happened when he got home? Well, he was arrested and jailed, not by the United States, but by El Salvador. That suggests there's more to this story than meets the eye, and there's for sure more to the story than the headlines let on. So now let's broaden the lens. Let's talk about immigration and national sovereignty. Let's just take it from this story. And incidentally, there's way more to this story that's come out in the last 48 hours. And I'm inclined to believe and to agree rather with Tim Pool that it's come out that this man's wife filed a restraining order because he was abusing her, and she decided not to go through with it. And now she's coming out and talking about how wonderful of a husband he is. So let's cut through it with Occam's razor. This guy's an MS-14 gang member. That's incontrovertible. And I know, well, some people, no, it's not. Well, it is. If he's not an MS-13 gang member, he is a member of a gang. At least he's claimed to be. And the judge in the immigration court considered it to be a fact that is true, because the reason he got a stay of deportation was because of a rival gang back home. Anyway, I believe that the MS-13 gang has found this wife and is threatening her and is making her give a testimony of how good this guy is and testifying about his character. Anyway, that's conjecture. But I'd stand by that. But let's talk about immigration and national sovereignty just from a broader lens. In every country on earth, legal residency is conditional. You can follow the rules, you can fill out all the paperwork, you can pay all the money, and you can still find yourself on the outside looking in, because the host nation ultimately decides who stays and who goes. They do not have to have any reason whatsoever to say, go back to the land of your nativity. If Canada wants to send me home, they can. No court hearing is required. That's the nature of sovereignty. We seem to forget that in America. We act like crossing the border or getting a work permit somehow entitles us to full rights and citizenship. Well, it doesn't. Legal presence isn't a promise, it's a privilege. If we go to a foreign nation, we are there at their good pleasure. If somebody from a foreign nation comes here, they are here at the United States government's good pleasure. And let's be clear, this isn't about being heartless. It's about understanding the rule of law. We can show compassion, but compassion must work within the boundaries of order, not against them. Remember, God is not a God of confusion, that's disorder, chaos, but of peace, that's order. So there's a growing tendency to confuse personal feeling with legal reality. That's a dangerous road. Law guided by emotion alone becomes tyranny. Order must come first, then mercy can be meaningfully applied. So let's turn to the scriptures, because God has somewhat to say about this. Let's get a biblical perspective on authority and justice. Romans 13:1 tells it plainly. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. That includes presidents, that includes border agents, and that includes legal frameworks that determine immigration status. 1 Peter 2:13-14 commands us to submit to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king or to governors or those sent to punish evildoers and reward good behavior. God expects order, not anarchy. In the Old Testament, God gave Israel clear laws for how to treat strangers and sojourners. But he also expected those strangers to obey the law of the land. There was no category of perpetual lawlessness granted in the name of charity. Mercy is not the absence of justice. Mercy operates within the boundaries of the law. Christians need to understand this. We are not more righteous than God by trying to overturn structures he has put in place. We can cry injustice and every deportation. We may be making lawful authority. We may be mistaking lawful authority for cruelty. I need to repeat that. I butchered it. When we cry injustice at every deportation, we may be mistaking lawful authority for cruelty, and that's a dangerous mistake. So here's the bottom line. We have to have clarity over emotion. The executive branch of our government holds the real authority when it comes to immigration. That includes the discretion to remove non-citizens, even in cases that feel emotionally complicated. The courts offer opinions. Congress can change laws. So the courts can offer their opinions. The Congress can change laws, but the president enforces them. And if the president refuses to act, there's only one constitutional remedy: impeachment. That's how the system works. It always has. You may not like it. That's fine. But don't misrepresent it. Don't act like the law was broken when it wasn't. Don't use one story to dismantle an entire framework that's kept order for centuries. We have honest discussions. We must have these honest discussions about reform. But if we're having discussions about reforming the wrong thing because we are looking at it through an emotional lens, then we're not having an honest discussion. And it's not Donald Trump that did wrong here if wrong was done. Change the system, change the laws. Because according to what the law read and according to the order of events that's happened, especially the things that's come out in the last 48 hours, you had a guy that come into the United States illegally. While he was here illegally, he applied for asylum and was denied. He was offered a stay of deportation because of a rival gang in El Salvador threatening his life. The president of El Salvador cleaned that up and made it safe, so the Department of Justice said, well, we're going to send him home now. There's no reason to keep him here. Well, you might say, well, he's got a wife and children and this, that, and the other, and a life here. That's on him. If he knew he was temporary here, which he was, then he shouldn't have made a life. He shouldn't have married. I don't do anything here in Canada that I can't take back home. Nothing. If I was single in Canada and not a citizen, I wouldn't court. I wouldn't date. Not unless I knew that I could get that girl back home, or I knew for a fact that I could be permanent here. Can't do that. Anyway, so we can have honest discussion about reform if we're talking about reforming the right thing, but we cannot abandon the principles that make reform possible, which is clarity and truth. The rule of law matters. National sovereignty matters. And the authority God has put into place matters. So let's talk about immigration, but let's do it with clarity, not chaos. I really appreciate your time and attention. Let's see about our podcast, or let's see about our comments. Let me go up here and get our graphic off here. All right. Good morning, Mike Osnes. Good to see you. Mark Andrew, Christopher Pulton. Thank you very much. George Williams, good to see you in the chat again. Hello, Terry Crooks. Good morning to you. And yeah, Mike Osnes, absolutely. Just as God can say who has citizenship in heaven. That's it. That's it. And I don't understand why the United States of America seems to be the only nation in the world. Let me do this. How many nations exist right now? 195 countries. All right, countries following the UN definition and classification, for which we have counted 195 countries in the world. So I'm looking here. Yeah, 195. It looks like 195 is the agreed upon number. I promise you, in all 195 countries, if you go in and you overstay a work permit or you overstay a visa or you go in as a visitor with no paperwork whatsoever and you don't leave in the allotted time, because it is true from the United States going to Canada, you can go to Canada and I think you can stay up for up to 6 months. You just can't do anything while you're here. You can't work. But anyway, but if you got enough money to live in Canada without working for 6 months, come up here and do it. You don't have to have any paperwork whatsoever. I'm assuming that's something to that effect in the United States, that you can come into the United States with no paperwork whatsoever and visit. But you got to leave. You can't just get lost in the interior. And that's what this guy did. He came in, he got lost in the interior. He asked for sovereignty and he was denied. And then when it was safe for him to go back home, that deportation stay was revoked and they sent him back home. I don't understand the conversation we're having. And I was watching Piers Morgan and some leftist was trying to say Dinesh D'Souza was the same as this guy, this revered Maryland father who's an MS-13 gang member. And Dinesh D'Souza was like, well, let's compare to see if Dinesh is like this guy. Dinesh came over first from India as a child through a foreign exchange program, and then he graduated from that to a student visa, and then he worked his way up to citizenship. He's not been a citizen for very long. It took him forever. Like, it was a long and grueling process that took, quite frankly, a lot of money. This guy, Dinesh D'Souza, never entered the country illegal. His status was never illegal. His status was always legal. And you know what the funny thing is? At any moment before Dinesh D'Souza became a permanent resident / citizen, the Department of Justice could have sent him home for any reason whatsoever, even if they didn't like his glasses. That's always the case with immigrants. That's always the case. Now, our Constitution does give them more rights than other nations gives their immigrants. It's just the truth. But Dinesh D'Souza at any time could have had his path to citizenship blocked for any reason. And it would be legal. It might not be right. It might not be moral, but it would be legal. So if you've got an issue, let's change the situation. I wrote an article comparing the modern immigration model to slavery light. I don't think it's a good model that we're working with. I get that. But we can't deny the fact that the nation has the right to dictate who's in and who's out. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. If I didn't convince you or change your mind or make you think by now, I don't have anything else. I'm done. I'm so thankful to everybody who commented. Remember, thank you very much, Diana S. Johnson. Appreciate you. Remember, we have ways. There are ways to support us. Like and share on Facebook. Go to my Facebook and like and share. If you want to send a Bible question or show topic, go to christianityisnow@gmail.com and do that. And you can support us monthly on Patreon. Right now, I'm currently talking with Stripe. I've got to jump through some hoops, and in order for them to be able to take my account and figure out how to link it back up to Substack, because my premium subscribers on Substack, I'm not getting any of that money. So I've got to get that. I got to get that fixed. Something has happened. But anyway, subscribe on Substack. Go to Substack and look up Christianity Now. Go to Spotify, Apple Podcast, TuneIn Radio, or Podbean, and like, subscribe, and share the podcast over there. And yeah, don't forget about Rumble. We're doing so well on Rumble. In fact, I should have looked. I don't think I've got any. Oh, Grace Fontaine. Well said, man. Well, I appreciate that, Grace Fontaine. And I've got 10 people watching on Rumble. Good grief. Thanks for tuning in. All right. Thanks for tuning in, all you folks on Rumble. That's amazing. All right. Well, folks, that's all I've got today. Again, this has been Tony Brewer with Cogitations. And where am I at? I can't find me. There we go. So this has been Tony Brewer with Cogitations. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, do all the stuff. Follow on Rumble, follow on Rumble, follow on Rumble. God bless you.